kick off this forum on raising multilingual citizens of the world. The University of Washington has a profound commitment to the study of language, language acquisition, and language pedagogy. It is a truly fundamental part of our educational mission to open doorways for our students to their futures as global citizens, that we want them to be prepared to go out and communicate and collaborate across national and linguistic lines, and to do so with cultural competence and with a deep respect for and understanding of the history and accomplishments of the communities with which they interact. We currently offer more than 35 languages for students to take here at the university. And as befits an institution that is very aware of itself as a Pacific Rim university, 12 of those languages are identified with East, Southeast, and South Asia, including some of the very largest language programs here at the university in Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, but also lesser-taught languages that are still approached with care and given first-rate instruction, such as Bangla, Bahasa Indonesia, and there's so many. I was going to Central Asia, Uyghur, and so forth. But we really, truly believe that our students need an exposure to the linguistic diversity of the world. My commitment to this educational mission is not only as an administrator and as myself a pedagogue, but it's also a personal commitment. I grew up in a part of the state of Kentucky where it was much more common when kids graduated high school for them to get married and settle down than it was for them to go to college, where most of my friends were looking to get jobs in farming or coal mining. The kinds of horizons that we had open to us were relatively limited. We just didn't think beyond. And in my case, I had an absolutely transformative experience in 6th grade. Happened to have a short introductory unit to some of the fundamentals of Spanish. And it just, a light bulb went off in my head. Like, wow, everything can be otherwise. And I went out and tried to take as many kinds of language classes as I could in our school system. Spanish, French, German, to the point that as far as we could offer them. And then went out and found a summer program, gifted and talented youth program through Duke University, where I took Russian and then followed that up with a correspondence course. And it really changed my entire way of thinking about myself and my place in the world. And by the time I was undergraduate and had a chance to study in the Soviet Union, I was launched into a very different kind of vocation, life understanding than I would have otherwise without that opportunity at a relatively early age to begin learning other languages. I'm thankful for that these days. I'm a professor of English and comparative literature. I actively write about literature written in Polish, Latin, French, and in the last few years, because of this position, I've been traveling frequently to East Asia. And my friends on Facebook are getting increasingly annoyed at me with all of my sorts of daily posts about cool things I've just learned about Chinese. Yesterday's was the phrase "Naja," which means immediately or right now, but it literally means on horseback. And that kind of encoding in a language of a historically sedimented cliche is kind of really cool for a professor. So anyway, that's an example of my own kind of personal and deep commitment to language instruction and what it can do for our students. And in terms of what's going on today, here at the University of Washington, we're very aware that the old model of imagining that our students show up at college and they begin studying conjugations on day 1 of first year, and then by the end of their 4th year, they're reading canonical literature in the language. But that kind of arc really doesn't fit our students, nor does it make sense given how education works in this country these days. We have to be aware that our students are coming to us with so many different kinds of skills and backgrounds. So much language instruction is going on in different ways in K through 12 education than it used to. And we have so many heritage speakers who both have skills we want to connect with, but they have different kinds of instructional needs. So we need to be aware where our students are. We need to be working with all of you out there to connect and make sure that students are being led into language instruction here in the best possible manner. We also have to be aware that our students' time demands are different than they used to be. That we cannot necessarily expect that our students are going to be able to come here and start from zero with studying a category 5 language, that is Japanese or Chinese or Arabic or Korean, and attain to professional competency, which takes something like 2,200 hours of instruction, 3 full years of college study of a language. If somebody comes here to be an engineer, they're not necessarily going to have that opportunity. So we need to be able to think about, again, how language instruction works here. We need to collaborate with you all to make sure that the students have opportunities that allow them to get here and attain to the level that they would like, that we would like for them. Oh, there's so much I could say. And I can rattle on and on. But I think that one thing I would like to say is there's also this Platonic ideal of after you've had language instruction, you're going to be able to go out in the world and fluently and flawlessly communicate with people. And while that's a great goal, and I wouldn't want to prevent that, it's a richer way to think about these matters in regards to translingual or transcultural literacy. So that what we're hoping for our students to acquire is that ability to be a global citizen, to go out and to be ready to communicate across difference, to be ready to understand that the person they're speaking to is coming from a different position with a set of different experiences, and to approach that moment with empathy and confidence because they've had experience with various kinds of cultural settings, different kinds of language learning experiences. The one for me I'll always remember, I'll wrap up in just a moment, is when I was studying in the Soviet Union and I thought I understood basic Russian, and then the toilet in our apartment broke. And I had to try to talk to the building super on the phone and explain what was wrong. And you just do not learn the parts of toilet in another language until you're in that lived moment. So I had to say, the thing connected to the thing won't go. That level of kind of baseline ignorance. But we got through it, and the toilet did get repaired. And then that's exactly the sorts of moments of instruction that go beyond the classroom, but we can be aware of and work back into the classroom. And so I invite you today with your conversations to be thinking about this goal of the global citizen, what it means to be a multilingual citizen of the world, and how we can all help our own children, the students that we teach, reach to that admirable goal. And again, I welcome you to the University of Washington via Zoom, and I really hope that today's proceedings prove to be illuminating and useful. And my thanks to all of you for your interest in this tremendously important collective educational mission.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brian. That's a very inspiring, welcoming message. And with us next is actually Bridget Yaden, if I pronounce the name correctly, who is our newest president of ACTFL, the American Councils on the Teaching of Language, and foreign languages, and she's actually with us in Washington State. She's at this point, Bridget, are you in Tacoma? Hello, Bridget. Okay, let me try to find her on Zoom.
I am here.
Oh, hi, Bridget. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Okay.
And
are you ready to share your screen?
yes, I think I can. Let me try that and make sure you can all see my slides.
Yes. Yes, yes.
Perfect. Can everyone see the slides and still hear me?
Yes. We can hear, yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you, everyone, and I welcome you all today to the Forum on Raising Multilingual Citizens of the World. This is a topic that's a passion of mine. Yes, I'm down in Tacoma, Washington. I teach at Pacific Lutheran University. This is my 28th year teaching Spanish and my 24th year working with world language teachers, both pre-service and currently teaching teachers. And as you just mentioned, I'm honored to serve as your ACTFL president for this year, and yes, from Washington State. ACTFL is a national organization, if you don't know much about it. It's dedicated to the improvement and expansion of the teaching and learning of all languages at all levels of instruction. ACTFL is a membership organization of more than 12,500 language educators, so we're a powerful force. The topic of the forum today really truly is near and dear to my heart and aligns well with my presidential theme, which you have on the screen here, celebrating our assets through our diversity. And when I think of diversity, it's not only the diversity in the languages we teach or speak. I teach Spanish, but I've also studied Russian. Many of you today are either speakers and or teachers of Mandarin. But the way in which we come to language is another way we can celebrate our diversity. Dr. Reed was just alluding to that our students are coming to us with assets that they've got achieved not necessarily in a traditional classroom, right? So our students come to us perhaps formally having studied language in school, acquiring a language at home through their family, a heritage speaker, for example, maybe through travel or self-study. So we celebrate those assets as well, how our students come to our languages. So just quickly this morning, I have a few updates from the national level that I think affect us here in Washington State. I'll touch briefly on the seal of biliteracy, a jobs report showing the importance of language study, and then I'll share some other advocacy tools. And these are all things that are open to anyone, whether you're a member of ACTFL or not. So whether you're a teacher, a researcher, a parent or a grandparent on the call today, or a student yourself, I want to thank you all and encourage you to keep developing our multilingual citizens. So here's on this first picture, you might recognize a few folks. I'm going to move my video so I can see. Michelle is here behind our governor. My son is to the right of the governor, looking at the governor, and I'm right behind my son. This is a little bit about the seal of biliteracy, which this afternoon you'll have an opportunity to learn a little bit more from Dr. Michelle Ancioa-Oki. And again, she needs no introduction, but she is our biggest advocate for the seal. She's passionate about this. And Michelle is honestly the reason why Washington State was one of the first states to actually get the seal of biliteracy. So you'll hear from an expert this afternoon. But what's the seal of biliteracy? It recognizes high school graduates who attained a high level of proficiency in listening, speaking, reading, and writing in one or more languages in addition to English. And the seal is attached to your high school transcript, and I think makes a great resume booster, whether you then go to apply for jobs and or to college. The seal recognizes your proficiency, again, regardless of how you came to the language, whether you're a heritage speaker, self-study, through travel, or through a classroom. ACTFL is currently partnering with several national organizations to update some implementation guidelines for implementing the seal, which includes ways that both public and non-public entities can award the seal, and also what it might look like for institutions of higher learning, like myself at Pacific Lutheran University. We're looking at implementing a seal to encourage students to get even higher proficiency than the current Washington State High School seal, which is intermediate mid, giving students a carrot to continue to study their language and celebrating their achievements as they go. The seal of biliteracy is really a movement. It's a national movement, not just a policy. So here we are in 2014. Let me move on to the next slide, I hope. Here's just a map. This is actually constantly changing. So right now there are more than 38 states plus the District of Columbia that award some sort of seal of biliteracy. They all have various requirements, but they're all almost all of them are aligned with proficiency, your ability to use a language. Celebrating Washington State, in 2018, we awarded almost 2,000 seals in 59 different languages. We actually would win the award, if there were such a thing, for having the most diversity of the languages that we celebrate in our state. If you want more information about all the data, it's at thesealofbiliteracy.org. There's actually a national report, and you can see how we stack up against other states. But speaking of resume boosters, many of you may not have seen this. A recent report that ACTFL commissioned gives us data about something that we all already know intuitively, that language skills and intercultural understanding really are positive assets in the job market. But now if you need data for your stakeholders, this is a wonderful report that you can access to show that the businesses themselves are telling us what we already know. So this is a large-scale study that ACTFL did with 1,200 US employers, and the resulting 2019 report shows an urgent and rising demand for language skills in the workplace. You can download the full report for free and also the executive summary from the ACTFL website. Just a couple things that I found interesting, and when I think about advocating for language study amongst our students and then other stakeholders, 9 out of 10 US employers say they rely on employees with language skills other than English, and 56% of them say that the demand is going to increase over the next 5 years. I have 2 more slides about this. Maybe happily for this group, you might celebrate that Chinese was the 2nd most in-demand foreign language reported by, again, US employers, 1,200 of them surveyed. Not surprisingly, Spanish is number 1, but look at the diversity of other languages. French, Japanese, German, all the way down to Portuguese are still pretty high numbers. And the most interesting thing, because, you know, I think a lot of times when we talk about language study with our own students, we say, well, you could work abroad, right? Actually, when you look at this graph, the US employers report that it's domestic needs that are the highest. They need language speakers to work here in the US, not to go work in their Beijing office or their Paris office, right? But to work here in the US. 47% said these language needs were domestic only. And then another 25% said mostly domestic. And look at only 8 to 11% say international only or mostly international. So this really shows us that language skills are needed for our citizens, right? And then one other tool I'd like to highlight that ACTFL provides for free, again, you don't need to be a member of ACTFL, is the Lead with Languages campaign. It's a wonderful advocacy tool. If you go to their website, you'll see that there are wonderful videos and graphics and pamphlets on why learn languages in general, why the study of language is important. And then you can pick on specific languages such as Mandarin and have language specific reasons for why in particular should my child study Mandarin, or should my heritage speaker of Mandarin keep up his or her skills. So these are all resources that are available through ACTFL. I'll copy and paste this information into the chat room as well. I'd welcome anyone to email me at yaden@plu.edu if you have more questions or things you'd like to know. And then the 2 websites that I referenced here that again have free resources. But I would like to thank you for having me welcome you this morning and really enjoy your forum today. Thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you all so much. I believe this is my first time seeing you in person online, but thank you for this inspiring message. Language is our business, language is our career, language is our passion. And I think for many of us sitting in this room and also sitting in front of the computer, we are also believers that language learning should begin when we're young. And also language is not only learned in classrooms, but also at home and in the communities. And that actually brings me to our next speaker, Dr. Shuhan Wang. Shuhan, are you there?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah. And Shuhan has been working with us on to get this forum started actually for a long time. And it's unfortunate that, you know, her trip is being canceled because of this virus, but thanks to technology, she can still join us over Zoom. And Shuhan and I have been knowing each other for many, many years. And I have been a very faithful reader of all her publications. And I am very proud to actually be personally working with her to bring this forum to all of you. And Shuhan, I believe we will be working on something else very soon in the future. Before I turn the mic over to Shuhan, I would like to clarify that because of the coronavirus, we're not holding the afternoon workshop today. We will be letting you know in the future when we will hold this afternoon part of today's forum. And rest assured, we have received tremendous support, not only from the teachers, but also from the industry, from publishers, from our departments and all that. So just stay tuned with us, okay? So now I'm going to turn over to Shuhan, who will begin her plenary talk today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Chen for your kind introduction. Indeed, you know, we actually started this. I lost the view for everybody. I can only see my own slides. So I'm kind of at loss here for the. Let me try different things. Can you see my screen, my slides? Are you seeing?
Yes.
Wait.
Yes. Hi.
You are seeing my slides?
So Shuhan, now just on your top right, middle top, you will see view options. So you can click on it.
Wait, view options. Yeah.
So now it's side by side. Did you see that now? I can see you now.
Yeah, you can see me, but let's see.
So
yeah, this is
did you see this part on the top? You are viewing Shuhan Wang's screen, and then next to it there is view options on the very top.
You know what? It's okay.
Okay.
Because I cannot see it, but I don't want to lose time or the opportunity to present. So let me go back to what I was saying, that basically it's a big disappointment that I'm not there to be with you in person, because this conference, we actually started the planning with Dr. Chen Lu, Dr. Amy Pace and their teams at the University of Washington, and also Dr. Michelle Aoki starting in December last year. And so it really it is a disappointment, but again, thanks to Zoom that we are able to meet online at least, you know, and thanks to Dr. Reed and also Dr. Yaden for your kind, you know, wonderful opening and very encouraging messages as well. So let me just go to my talk. The title is Considerations of Children's Development of Biliteracy. And I do want to kind of take a broader view on why we're here today. So let me see. I'm not able to move my, again, okay, sorry about this. We try actually. Let me do the sharing again. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I don't know why I'm not able to move it. Huh.
Can you click the next slide on the bottom? And we'll
I try different ways, and we actually were able to do it. I don't know what happened here. Okay, hold on a second. This is embarrassing, but of course, we actually try it. I'll do the sharing again. And all right. My talk is divided in 3 parts. Very quickly, what is biliteracy and why is it important, and how do we help children develop biliteracy? And then I'll end with my conclusion and recommendation. So everybody's been talking about biliteracy, and generally speaking, when we talk about literacy, we refer to the literacy, the ability to read and write in one language, you know, as literacy, and biliteracy, by extension, of course, it's in 2 languages. But I really take a broader view on looking at literacy, and I defined it, or really based on a lot of literature, and I came up with this, you know, the abilities to communicate, read, write, and interact in 2 languages in their cultural context. And I'll do further define it later as I talk about the recommendation part. But, you know, I just want to call our attention to the idea that global competency is really part of biliteracy. As defined by Asia Society and the Council of Chief State School Officers, they explain that global competency is the capacity and disposition to understand and act on issues of global significance. So a globally competent citizen or workers are the one who have the ability to investigate the world and to recognize perspectives from different cultural groups, different communities, different disciplines, and to have the ability to communicate ideas in different languages and with the cultural frame of references. And finally, it's more important than ever is to take action, to be agents of change and make a difference to improve the situation, our world, or solve problems that we face. So this is a profile of a global professional that we are trying to raise. And this graphic actually looks like a person. And indeed, it is, in their belly, they should be prepared and fully equipped with professional training and experiences in the global context. And they are standing on two legs. On one leg is that they have the increased knowledge and compassion for the humanity. And on the other hand is that they should have the enhanced intercultural, communicative, and collaborative skills to interact successfully and appropriately with the world. And up here in their brain, they have higher, better executive functions that they are able to do critical thinking and suppress all the different noises and fake news or whatever, fake information, and think for themselves and critically, resolve issues or come up with problem-solving skills and collaborate with other people in the world and or in their community. So this is the vision that we have for this child who has biliteracy. Therefore, so we come to the question of why is it important, for a child growing up in the 21st century, as we are experiencing this COVID-19 situation, it really illustrates how interconnected we are already, deeply integrated, intertwined. There's no way around it. And so biliteracy is really part of the new basic skills for this world, for these children. And in fact, a couple of years ago, the Brookings Institute and the Lego Foundation, they convened a meeting of experts in the field, and then they talk about what kind of skills are necessary to prepare our children for a changing world. And the conclusion is, the breadth and depth of skill is important, and that's a key. However, there's no way to teach them everything they need to know because they are going to hold jobs that are beyond our imagination. We don't even have names for their jobs that they're going to have. So, the key is that instead of giving them fish, we need to give them the tool, for fishing and teach them how to fish. And the most importantly is to develop people who have the capacity and the skills for engaging in lifelong learning and to adapt to change. So the question then is, how do we help them develop biliteracy and at home and in the school? Because I'm keenly aware of our audiences are educators as well as parents, And so my recommendation is we need to take a playful approach. A playful approach, I'll unpack this for you in the next few minutes. So the P for the playful is positive relations. Positive relations, the relationships refers to that they have that relationship with the people around them who are important to them, like their peers, parents, and teachers, and all the significant adults. And they also need to have positive relationships with the environment in which they're in, the classroom, the school, the home, and the community, and so forth. And we also have to figure out that whether a child is under toxic stress, and do they experience negative stress, and if so, how do we reduce or remove it? Because without these positive relationships, a child cannot function. And in fact, they are the foundation for the development of brain architecture, and that will be important for their success in school, the workplace, and also the larger community throughout their life. So children who have their needs met in physical development and having the satisfaction of materials that they need for their daily life, food, clothing, shelter, and other essentials, and also social emotional care that they need, they can become more loving and caring, empathetic and compassionate. They can be more respectful, cooperative, and also collaborative. And then that brings us to the L in the playful framework. The L stands for languages and literacies. And as I started, we are really looking at multiple literacy, not just reading, writing, abilities in languages. We are really thinking about literacies in different languages, cultures, and content areas. And so people are talking about media literacy, information literacy, as well as financial literacy, social literacy, and so forth. And so we're really also looking at literacies of naming the world around us and knowing how the world works, and so that they will be able to respond to the change and to any situation they are in. Specifically for learning languages, as Dr. Yaden, just mentioned to us, that the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages already have this world readiness standards in communication in different languages, the cultural understanding of different products, practices, and perspectives, connections to all content areas, and comparisons of cultures and languages, as well as being an active member and also contributing to their local as well all the way to the global communities. In fact, UNESCO and also, Center for Universal Education, they came up with this global framework of learning domains. And in there are 7 domains: physical well-being, social, emotional, culture and the arts, literacy and communication, learning approaches and cognition, numeracy and math, science and technology, as the part of that we need to integrate into our language learning. Because in this day and age, learning a language for the sake of learning language is no longer sufficient. We need to integrate languages, content, and cultures into our curriculum. Then the question is that, I actually got a lot of questions from a lot of parents from Chinese immersion programs and other language immersion programs. And the parents say, I don't know the language, how do I help my children? So, of course, there are uniqueness to a certain language, but there are also a lot of commonalities across languages, particularly literacy skills are transferable. And again, there are unique part to it. There are also common part. For example, sensory motor skills, their eye-hand coordination, visual memory, their ability to discriminate sound and visuals, spatial directional skills, those are all transferable. And every language has its own writing system, but there are a lot of conventions and also the writing in the system that's common across all languages. The comprehension skill strategies for listening, for reading, for viewing the world is are pretty common and transferable. For example, we all have to get main ideas, making inferences, making prediction, guessing, getting details, supporting ideas, and drawing conclusion using pictures and contextual clues and so forth. Study skills are transferable, and the habits and attitude, most importantly, the confidence in knowing that and being a good reader, good writer, and good communicator. And another thing that we can easily do at home and also in the classroom is really constantly engage in comparison as a method of inquiry, always asking children and students what's different, what's the same, and most importantly, ask not just the what question, but the how and why question. The what question has right and wrong answers, and also it's focusing on the here and now, but the how and why questions have no right answers, and it really stretches students for a deeper understanding, deeper learning, and also beyond the space and going to, sort of there in the imagination, any space that they can go to. That brings us to the A part of the playful framework. The A stands for active learning. And active learners are better in cognitive development. They are better to acquire conceptual and procedural knowledge and skills in different content areas. They are also better in metacognitive awareness, and that means they are better in learning how to learn, how to think, how to ask questions, use imagination, be curious, and be creative. And so we really need to teach them learning skills, learning strategies, as well as encourage them to use it and reflect upon them. And so in the classroom or even at home, we really need to design and use different activities that tap into multiple intelligence, because all of us have multiple intelligence, but some of us have stronger ones in certain areas and maybe underdeveloped ones in other areas. So by doing that, we will be able to personalize entry points and help children to sustain their learning. Also, let's try to move learning through the new Bloom's taxonomy. And make no mistake, somehow in education today, memorization is a dirty word, but it's really very essential as well. And so we really need to remember to memorize, but that's not the end all. More importantly, we go deeper or higher into understanding, into application, analysis, synthesis, as the end goal is to encourage students to create with what they have learned with their two languages, and what they know about the cultures, to produce something, to demonstrate their learning. So that brings us to the last one in the playful framework is the why. Yes, I can attitude and grit. Yes, I can attitude and grit really takes the Dr. Carol Dweck's at Stanford's powerful messages and teaching on a growth growth mindset, and it's really a belief that abilities can be developed, and so we want to tell our children and keep in mind for ourselves that there is a continuum of can do. And so we constantly have kids, reflect, have those active learners reflect that at what stage that they are in their skill and knowledge acquisition, and whether I need help, I can do it most of the time, I can do it by myself, or I can even teach others. And grit, this is really something that's not new for people coming from Asian culture, because Asian culture really emphasize making efforts, and Western cultures, we kind of starting from praising innate ability. And so we praise children for, wow, you're so smart. But Asian parents and teachers would say, well, you know, why don't you try harder next time? And so we can combine both. But the idea is that we really want children to take responsibility and be persistent and passionate and resilient about learning, and really impart them with the idea of not to give up easily. And so what we need to do is really to break complex tasks into smaller, you know, steps and parts so that they can enjoy success along the way, while later accumulates into a larger complex, you know, accomplishment of a task, and then that give them the gratification and satisfaction for you know, being successful. So this is very important, and we just really have to pay attention to that. So for adults, what we need to do is really believe in children, and we need to model learning. We need to let them know that there's something we don't know either. Let's do this together. Let's learn this together. And there's a fun in discovery learning. And so, you know, we need to set high standards, but we need to also create that nurturing atmosphere to carry them through hard work and more hard work. And so a good teacher and a good parent is really continue to learn along with the students and do it together. So, you know, the message is how we foster the can-do attitude and grit. We need to watch and listen to ourselves when we talk to a child, particularly when they mess up. And because every word, everything sends a very strong message. And over time, it becomes something that really sticks in their mind, and then that kind of sort of mold how they look at themselves. So we need to also think about how we use praise, not just focusing on how smart they are, but really on their efforts, their strategies, their different steps that they do. So, you know, we need to let them know that what we care is whether they grow, they develop, they learn, not necessarily the end result for one shot, and focus on the process, you know, what strategies, efforts, and choices they make. And we provide them feedback and help them analyze and get them to come to the aha moment, and then that stick with them. And then they are more willing to make changes. And over time, they develop this can-do attitude and grit. So my conclusion, and hopefully your takeaways, would be, number one, we have a broader understanding about biliteracy. We really want to sort of encourage the holistic perspective on thinking biliteracy, and that refers to the abilities to communicate, read, write, and interact with the world in at least two languages and cultures, and also in all different content areas. And it is really a linguistic and cultural inheritance and gift that we can bestow children, because honestly, we really mess up this world. And I am a grandmother of 5 beautiful grandchildren, and I feel the responsibility to really make sure that I can give them something that will equip them to be successful in their future and be happy in their future. So we make sure that children really enjoy playful learning. And I just would like to remind all of us, a playful approach is that children enjoy positive relations so that they can learn, and they then learn languages and literacies in all different content areas, including languages and cultures. And also they are engaged in active learning constantly, and they have the attitude of, yes, I can, and have the grit to go after that. And before I finish, I would like to call your attention to a wonderful resource, CELIN, that my colleagues and I work on it. CELIN stands for Chinese Early Language and Immersion Network at Asia Society. And we have a wonderful website. We have school profiles. If you want to find out if your schools is on the our database, please go. We have that searchable map, you know, and information about any school that you want to find out. And we have resources for educators and parents. And we also have publication. And this is what we call brief. It's like an Eric digest in the past. And we right now have 11 briefs are online in English and Chinese. And it's a free download and you can access it, you know, anytime you want to. So if you have any questions or, you know, some concerns or would like to have more conversation with me, you can reach me at my email. And thank you very much for your time and your attention. And I wish you great success for the rest of today's forum. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Shuhan. You can
I'll stop sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
okay, great.
Great, thank you. So just a minute. Yeah, I very much enjoyed Shuhan's talk. How do I switch the view to speaker view? Okay. Actually, the talk was very, very reassuring of what I am doing as a parent of two myself, and also of what I have been reading in current research. And I'm sure you will find in our next panel, a lot of the messages are echoing what Shuhan has just mentioned. But before we take a break and switch to the next panel, we have time, we're right on time. So I encourage everybody who has questions to interact with Shuhan now. So I'm going to open up to the participants. I think we can do it two ways. One is we can text your questions here in the chat function. And I'm not sure how the microphone would work. If you have a question, I don't see the raise hand function here. Oh, how do I do that? Okay. Manage participant? Oh, okay. Oh, great. I see that now. Thank you. So if you would like to ask questions, if you would like to send Shuhan your questions by chat, you can do so. Or you can also raise your hand at this point. Where's the hand? I don't see hand.
It's in the check, next to the check mark. So maybe if you click more, the dot button.
Oh, this part?
Yeah, click that. Does that let you raise it?
This one? No.
You see a hand?
This one is clap.
Oh.
Hold on.
Maybe I have a question. Let her talk to it first.
Yeah, hold on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So Shuhan, in your presentation, hello, you mentioned the P is for positive relationship with people around them. Toxic stress. Can you give some examples of toxic stress? And sorry, can you be specifically to K-5 students?
Well, you know, a lot of children, for example, you know, they may come to K-5 especially, they come to school and they are pretty hostile, right? Or they don't want to interact, they don't feel like doing anything. And so maybe something happened at home, or maybe something that, you know, in the classroom, something happened, you know. And in fact, I remember one example that I saw in a classroom in another country, and two children were kind of fighting, and then, you know, that the teacher reprimanded both of them, and the student who actually initiated that and was, you know, taking advantage of the other one, that she was reporting that, oh, she did this to me and and the teacher scolded the other student even more. And I saw that student really scratching her leg so hard it actually bleeded. And that's one example of toxic relationship, that something that kind of beneath what we observe, and it really is happening. And that's really so important for a child, because for them, in their mind, justice is everything in the world, you know, and they are being wronged. And so those are situation that we kind of need to pay attention, in addition to sort of something obvious that, you know, a child is not learning, is hostile, is, so go deeper on looking for the reason why they are some kind of behaviors. Those are the sort of a simple example. And Tina, another thing, and for other participants, is that if you want to find out more about that, go to the Child Development Center at Harvard University. That's really a place where they give a lot of examples and tools.
You know, I was thinking about homework as a toxic stress, to be realistic. There are a lot of fights that ensue, that happen at home, because there are unrealistic expectations from parents who grew up in a different generation where homework is a must and homework is their path to success. And today's children, you know, and you list it yourself, we need to develop them in many different ways, and they don't want to do homework. And now there's toxic stress. So where I was trying to go with this question is, as an administrator and a parent, you know, a practitioner in this work, what is the role of homework or assignments where you see a lot of pushback? Because this is the foundation of trust. So, you know, and we have a lot of teachers here who, and a lot of practitioners who are behind the homework movement, right? For and against. So what's your take on that?
Actually, this is a big topic. We can, you know, spend a lot of time talking about it. But in a nutshell, I would advocate, well, personally, I think homework is important. However, the format and the method of homework can be different. It can be taking pictures around your neighborhood, you know, to that you see Chinese or whatever language is that you saw, and come back to the class, you know, and tell teachers what you saw, or something that you sing a song to your parents, or you read a book and have parents sign it, or read, you know, that kind of thing. It doesn't always have to be paper and pencil, but sometimes I think some paper and pencil is important, but we can make it in a way more like show somebody how to write some words, you know, that type of thing. So for me, I think that, because it's a big struggle, because, you know, my granddaughter, who's 5 years old, she's learning to play piano. And so I'm having a conversation with my daughter in trying to figure out, how do we make the half an hour practice time, break it down into something manageable and successful for the child. Otherwise, you know, even though she has a beautiful piano, that doesn't give the child satisfaction. And in fact, the child probably will walk around that piano and try to avoid it, you know, because that's a stress and that's a homework.
I know, my daughter quit piano. Thank you, Shuhan. We'll probably talk more about homework later.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, Shuhan, as you can see in the chat, there are many, many questions. One of them is sent to me privately, but I'm gonna copy and paste and resend here. I'm going to read the question out loud to everyone while I'm copy and pasting. I am an early childhood educator working with 2 and 3 years olds. We have multilingual community of families, about 7 different home languages in a center where English is largely the only language of instruction. We are starting to reimagine what our classroom language culture could look like to support multilingualism for our children. Do you have suggestions for us? This is a great.
Okay, yeah, I saw a lot of questions there, and specific for this one. Yeah, because we want to celebrate languages and cultures. And I do feel that, you know, while it is important that we have lingua franca in the classroom. On the other hand, I think a teacher can easily encourage children to always kind of share. How do you also, okay, so we say this in English, and this is how you say it or write it in Chinese, but how do you do this in Vietnamese? How do you say this in Korean? And everybody repeat after the child, you know, in Russian, whatnot, and making the child feel proud of knowing something that other people don't know, and they are able to share and be a little expert in sharing. And that is really the key, particularly for heritage language, you know, students, to feel valued and feel you know, proud of what they know, and that would be some kind of cultural and linguistic capital that they have, a part of their human capital that they have. So I don't know if I answered that question. Ah, wonderful, the Harvard, yeah, I think that's a very good one.
Okay. Shuhan, you see there are many other questions here.
I know,
yeah.
I know. So
You
maybe you can select one for me to answer.
Yeah, yeah. One of them, actually, I'm curious about. Also, Danielle asked, could you please share some suggestions for increasing grit and resilience in high school learners? I think this is a great question because I read the book by Angela Duckworth. She took in great lengths about how it works among adults and college students. But we do know it's hard with children. So what are some of the things that you think we could do? And also you might have heard it from her talk at the higher ed, the conference that you referenced just now.
Yes, yes, yeah. And she's actually a Penn, my alma mater. Mm-hmm. So recently I read a book, and I think that really is right on. It's about influence. And how, and one thing that they talk about is deliberate practice. In other words, you can practice and practice without you absent-mindedly or not paying attention to what you're practicing. So basically, you kind of achieve mediocre performance, and since it's enough, so you kind of plateau in the mediocrity. Okay. So the idea is that in order to reach the expert level, and that means, you know, even high school students and adults, that we want to have a breakthrough, we need to engage in deliberate practice. And that means that you really pay attention to one skill at a time. So I think that's really relevant for high school students, is that, you know, you can pay attention to, this is the time for, yeah, I mean, while you teach everything holistically, but there's a time for vocabulary, for grammar, for, you know, putting it together, for speaking, for reading, whatever it is. And then you break down, as I said earlier, you break down complex tasks into smaller parts. And that's a framework that they call it CEL, S-S-E-L. And I'll write to you later. And CEL means short-term, specific, easy, and low stake, you know, goals. And you break it into, okay, so our goal here is to really get and memorize and use the vocabulary, the 10 vocabulary, or 10 out of 15 that you must acquire. Instead of thinking about the whole unit or whole lesson and everything under the sun that you have to know about this. So specifically break down to the vocabulary level, and then really have a little quiz and get them to use it in context, and, you know, and you can go on and on, but break it down to CEL goals so that it's easily manageable. Everybody can feel success, and particularly with high school students. I taught high school before, and some students just feel that they can't do it. They give up, and they just go along with the wave and flow, and not really learning anything, you know, just very superficially. So if we can break it down and make sure that they are able to do that in small steps, that may be the way to help them to develop a grit. And that's actually, I earlier talked about my daughter, making my 5-year-old granddaughter sitting there, play piano for 30 minutes. And I think I'm going to suggest to her, instead of playing the whole song every day for a few times over and over, break it down into several, pieces, and then just really focus on those pieces over and over until the kid can memorize it, maybe only that, each day on another piece, and another piece, and gradually you come back and put them together day by day. You add more to it. And that's how you can enjoy the process of learning and really mastering it. Because I think that's a key. For really good learning, we really have to strive for mastery of all that content and skills, not just superficially learn it and then to communicate in a very broken language, that's just won't work.
Yeah, and I'm going to take my privilege as the host here to add to what Shuhan is saying. Actually, like half a year ago, I heard a podcast on, it's called Hidden Brain. And it was talking about how, as parents and teachers, as trainers, we actually should think about the kind of emotion that we bring as educators to our trainees. So for example, piano learning or language learning, I think Shuhan mentioned this as the first one, positive relations, right? If you say some word wrong, or if you play the piano or violin a note wrong, the first instinct was, no, do it right, do it wrong, you did it wrong, do it again. So the first response from us as adults is always negative. But the podcast I heard was advocating for the so-called click method, which is judgment-free and emotion-free. And just give a neutral phrase like, okay, that's not quite it. Let's try it again and try it again and try it again until you do it right. In that way, whether it's a child or an adult you're trying to teach will not be distracted by your emotion. Instead, the focus is on the skill or on the thing that you're trying to master. So, okay, I will send the link to the podcast here on the chat, but I'm going to maybe ask Shuhan to answer one more question. I saw a teacher, Li Ping Su, earlier raised a hand. So, Li Ping, are you still here?
Yes, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my question, thank you, Dr. Wang, for giving such a resourceful presentation about biliteracy. And I have a question about literacy transfer, more specifically when you were talking with parents about their ability to also foster literacy transfer. I guess your focus is more on the home language. Like many of the home language literacy can be transferred to, for example, here in America, to English literacy. For me, as a mother of 2 young children, I saw them from preschool transitioning to kindergarten. So I just wonder, what is the role of English language literacy at home? How home can also help building that English language literacy to help transit them from preschool to kindergarten?
That's a very good question. And in fact, I wasn't specifically talking about from home language to English. It could be also from English to home language because they reinforce each other. And so the idea is that, basically don't worry too much about which language, but whatever language you're engaged in, you want to really read to them, you know, for your children, you read to them and also encourage them to read to you, read to their brothers and sisters, read to their teddy bears, you know, and because the idea, literacy is also an act. And so the more that they are engaged into the literacy act, the better it is. And for example, you go shopping and you look for packages, you can also tell the child to look for certain things, certain pictures and certain character or words, or you know, English words, and get the children to help you, because we are engaged in literacy all the time. And so it doesn't necessarily mean books either. And so the idea is that, you know, a good reader is a good reader in any language, you know, as long as they can have that proficiency in that language. But the idea is that, you know, a good writer is a good writer. And so those are the transferable skills that we are talking about. I don't know if I answer your question, but what I'm saying is that don't worry too much, and specifically on certain sort of academic way of approaching literacy. Everything is literacy. And the more you encourage them to pay attention to prints, to, you know, different sounds and images in our environment, the better it is for them to notice and become better in literacy development.
Thank you, Shuhan, and thank you, Su Laoshi. So actually, this is a great question, and we could follow up in our next panel. Because of time, we need to take a break and then reconvene at 10:15 to begin our next panel. So everybody, please come back at 10:15. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Are we all back? Okay. This is awkward. But regardless, we're going to start our the second part of our morning session. We have a panel of three, myself, Dr. Amy Pace, and Dr. Naja Ferjan Ramirez. I'm butchering your name, I'm sorry, but I will do better next time. We're both professors and researchers at the University of Washington, interested in language acquisition. And we today will first start with Naja's presentation on more toward infant to second-year-old, perhaps, okay, and then followed by Amy's presentation, and then I will be the last one. So Naja, you can go ahead. I'm going to mute myself.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Ooh.
No, I mute myself.
Turn
Oh,
your
there's
volume
some.
up.
Oops.
And turn your volume up.
Turn your volume up. Yeah.
1 second. Hello, can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Is that a yes?
Yes.
Great, great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Naja Ferjan Ramirez. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Linguistics at the University of Washington. I also work with the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences, which is where I completed my postdoctoral training. And now I'm a collaborator with them. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about raising bilingual or multilingual children with a specific focus on infancy, or the first 2.5 to 3 years of life. Oops, how do I advance my slides?
Yes, we have the same challenge. John, do you recall how to forward the slides?
No, I can't. Oops.
Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
Right here. Oh, down here.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you. Thanks. So I'm going to start by reminding us of what we know about the critical or sensitive period for language learning. So you may have seen some version of this graph sometime before, and it is a little bit of an oversimplification, but for our purposes today it will do. So what I'm showing here is our ability to learn language, just the general ability to learn language. And the way to read this graph is to find your age on the bottom, and then you'll see our ability to learn language on the y-axis. And of course, this doesn't mean that we can't learn language as we get older. In fact, we can, and we do. But one thing that I really want you to focus on is just how good very young children are at language learning. So I really want you to look at the very top of this graph, this area here between 0 and 3 years of age, which is what I will be talking about today. And so babies actually are exposed to language already in the womb. So in the last trimester of pregnancy, they can actually hear the language that's spoken around them. And just hours after birth, infants can actually differentiate between the language with which they were surrounded when they were in their mom's bellies and a foreign language. And that's not just being able to recognize their mom's voice. This is also another speaker of that language, which can be a male speaker, a female speaker. So not just mom, but another speaker of the language with which they can be surrounded. They can differentiate that from other languages with which they were not surrounded. And you may be wondering, how in the world do we know this? Well, we have very sophisticated techniques to trick infants into showing us what they know. And one of them is called the sucking paradigm, which is shown in this picture. So what you do is you give the infant a pacifier, and they are very, very good at sucking right when they're born. And you hook it to a computer, and then you measure their rate of sucking, where basically the way this works is that if they hear something surprising, something that sounds different, like a different language, their rate of sucking will go up. So that's how we measure that. So they're born already knowing something about their native language, but they also have another amazing ability which we no longer have as adults, and it is the fact that they can actually differentiate between all the sounds of the world's languages. If you look at babies who are about 6 months old, a baby who lives in Seattle and whose parents speak English only in their home, that baby is actually capable of differentiating between the sounds of any language of the world. Say Chinese, German, French, all the languages of the world, they can differentiate, or we call this ability discrimination, but really what it means is that they can tell apart the sounds of all the world's languages. At this point in time, they are capable of learning any language in the world. So that's why we call them linguistic geniuses, and we also call them citizens of the world, and this is at about 6 months of age. So now I'm going to show you this graph, which shows what happens between 6 and 12 months of age. And this, I think, is really remarkable. So here we're looking at American infants and Japanese infants, monolingual. and their discrimination or ability to differentiate between the ra-la contrast. So if you look at American and Japanese infants, so the American infants, again, are only learning American English, pretend they're in Seattle. Japanese infants, say they're in Tokyo, they're only learning Japanese. So if we look at these babies between 6 and 8 months of age, these babies will be equally capable of differentiating between ra and la. But now look at what happens just a few months later. At 10 to 12 months of age, what you'll see is that the American infants become really, really good at differentiating between ra and la, and Japanese infants start to slowly lose their ability to differentiate between ra and la. And of course, this has to do with their language input, with the language with which they're surrounded. If you are surrounded with lots of ra's and la's, like American infants are, then you will become increasingly better at differentiating between these two sounds. And if you're not, like Japanese infants, you start to slowly lose the ability to differentiate between these two sounds. And of course, this is not true just for American or Japanese infants. It's true for any infant growing up anywhere in the world, right? Your brain will zoom into the sounds with which you're surrounded and will start to ignore, if you wish, the sounds with which you are not surrounded. It's part of typical development. And you may be wondering, how do babies do this? On the next slide, I'll show you a quick video to demonstrate what happens. And I hope that the sound will work. Let's try it.
Oh, I love your big blue eyes. So pretty and nice. うわー、大きな茶色いお目目。そして綺麗な黒い髪。
Okay, so what you should have seen, and I hope you did, was two moms. One is speaking American English, one is speaking Japanese. And so babies, they listen to the language input, like this type of language input, with which they're surrounded all day long, right? And so an English learning baby will hear lots of ra's and lots of la's, and will slowly start to build the ra and la category, right? And this baby will not build the Japanese ra category, which I will not try to produce because I don't know how to do this. But the point being that the babies will build the categories for the sounds with which they're surrounded. Our Japanese baby, on the other hand, will not build a category for the English ra and la, but will build a category for the Japanese ra. So of course, this is not just with one sentence, but over time, as they're hearing the language input over and over, they slowly build the categories of the sounds that exist in their native language. Of course, given that we are in a seminar on bilingualism or in a workshop on bilingualism, you might be wondering, and rightfully so, what about the baby who is hearing both English and Japanese, right? Can the baby's brain handle taking statistics on two sets of language input, and how does that work? And so this was exactly the question that we asked in one of our recent studies, which used what we call magnetoencephalography, or MEG, which you can see here. The machine itself looks a little bit intimidating. We call it the hairdryer from Mars, and it looks a lot like the old school hair dryers that we no longer see these days. But the important thing to understand here is that this machine is completely safe and completely non-invasive. It's also completely silent. So the machine is on and you can't hear it. It's very different than, for example, doing an MRI or something like that. An MRI is loud, this is not. This is completely silent. And babies sit like the baby in the picture here. So again, the question that we asked here is, can bilingual babies, in this case we looked at Spanish English bilingual babies, how can their brain handle taking statistics on two sets of language input, Spanish and English, and how does that differ between monolingual babies who are learning English only? So I'll quickly show you a video of what it looks like when a baby comes into our lab for an MEG session. And these babies, again, they're 11 months old. So right at the time that, if you remember that graph, right at the time that they start to zoom into the sounds of their native language. So let's look at what their visit looks like. So you shouldn't be hearing any sound, but what happens is that the parents, oops, what happened? Uh-oh, it's loading. Okay, let me try that again, okay? Okay, so the parents will bring the babies into the lab. So again, this is an 11-month-er. They're not walking yet. They're also not yet saying words, really. So what we do is we put a cap on the baby, and then we use this special pen. It's not really a pen, but it looks like a pen, to track the shape of the baby's head. The reason for that is that later on, this allows us to know exactly where in the space the baby's head is, so that if the baby moves, we know where the signal is coming from. So then the parent and the baby go into this magnetically shielded room, and the baby will sit in this chair. The head goes right into that hairdryer helmet, and then they sit and listen to the sounds of language. In this case, we listen to they listened to sounds, some sounds that were specific to Spanish and don't exist in English, some sounds that are specific to English and don't exist in Spanish, and some sounds that are common to both languages. So now I'm going to show you another video in which you'll see what the experiment looked like, what the babies looked like during the experiment. Let's advance. Okay, so you should be now, when I start the video, you should be hearing the sounds. So you saw that the machine is completely silent, and what we do is we play the sounds over a period of time. In this case, the experiment was about 18 minutes long. And they sit and listen to the sounds, just like kind of like going on a car ride. So you may then be wondering, what did you find? Well, what we found was exactly what we predicted, which is that bilingual babies were sensitive to encode both the sounds of Spanish and English. If you look at the strength of their brain responses, they were equally strong to Spanish as they were to English. If you look at monolingual babies, so babies from English-only speaking families, on the other hand, their responses to Spanish were very weak, versus their responses to to English were really strong. And so, of course, this is a reflection of their language input, where the monolingual kids are learning to encode the sounds with which they're surrounding, and so are the bilinguals. But what's interesting about this is that if you look at the brain's responses to English sounds, they were equally strong in both groups, showing that the brain is more than capable of encoding two sets of language input at the same time at this age. There was another finding that I want to highlight in this study. We looked specifically in what we call the prefrontal part of the baby's brain. So it's highlighted here in green, and this, the prefrontal cortex is right in the front of your brain. So if you touch your forehead, it will be right behind your hand, so at the very front of your brain. And when we look specifically in the prefrontal cortex, we saw that the brain responses in bilingual infants were stronger than in the monolingual infants. And you may be wondering, why would this be? Well, we know that this particular brain area, the prefrontal cortex, is involved in what we call executive functioning. Executive functioning being the ability to go back and forth between doing different tasks, to focus your attention, and to think flexibly. And what we think is happening is that these babies who are constantly shifting back and forth between two sets of language input, this serves as so-called, we like to think of it as the brain gymnastics. They're become really good at shifting back and forth. And we think that what we're seeing here is an enhancement in these brain networks that deal with executive functioning. You may have heard that other researchers have shown enhanced executive function abilities in bilingual adults. What we're seeing here is the area that deals with executive functioning showing increased activity in bilingual babies at 11 months before they actually say their first words. And so we think that that's exciting. Now, I want to now turn to one behavior that such babies may demonstrate about a year after this. So at about 2 years or even a year and a half, once they start producing their words, one thing that you might see is what we call code switching. And I'm sure you all are familiar with what code switching is. What it is the use of two languages in the same situation. So this here will be a short video of my son, who is, in this case, he's actually learning 3 languages. We speak Slovenian, Spanish, and English at home. But in this case, he is producing a mix of Spanish and English. So I just wanted to show you what that might look like for a child who's not yet 2 years old, right when they start to produce their words. So let's take a look, and then we'll talk about it.
Sancho, what are you eating?
Upis.
Yum. How do you call it?
Upis.
Oops, sorry, no more. I'm trying to say, anyway, so what he's saying is golpes, right, which is, for those of you who are familiar with Spanish, pez is fish in Spanish. And so clearly he created this blend between Spanish and English, right, where he's, instead of saying goldfish, he's saying golpes. And so what we want to say about something like this is that for a bilingual child, this is part of typical development and a very normal process where you will see that they have a knowledge, they have a vocabulary in both languages, and in this case, they have a very creative way of combining these two languages. So we don't want to call this an error or a mistake. Instead, what this child is demonstrating is that he knows that goldfish actually consists of 2 morphemes, and he also understands that fish then is the same as pez in Spanish and is able to combine these 2 things. Later on, of course, when children go into sentences, this can look different where they combine both languages across sentences or within the same sentence, and Amy will address this when she talks about older children. Okay, so I want to conclude by saying that the infant brain is prepared to learn multiple languages at the same time. We saw some brain evidence of this. However, we also know that the growth of language in each of the languages that babies experience is very much related to the quality and quantity of language that they hear. So for a child to become fluent in both languages that they're hearing, what we want, of course, is exposure, high quality exposure in both languages, not only in infancy, but then continuing through the toddler ages and through the preschool ages and beyond. So I will now turn it to Amy to continue with children who are a little bit older. Thank you.
Thank you, Naja. So, Naja, turn off sharing, and Amy can start sharing.
Okay. Oh, you need to turn off your food.
Turn off.
Oh, here, push mute on the bottom. Yeah, left. Okay, is yours off? Yeah. Maybe turn your volume down also.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, good. Can people hear me online? Maybe. Yes. Oh, no, I need to share first.
Yeah.
Okay. Aha. Okay, let's try this. Oh. Did you guys see that? Yeah. Why do I need to do that?
And then you can find your slides.
Ah, let me click it. Ah.
Are we doing a Q&A?
Why? Okay. Click now. Ah. Okay. Okay, now share. There we go. And do I have to
Share, yeah.
And then I can do this.
Let me ask
Okay.
if they can all see you and hear you before
Okay.
you go. Okay. Okay. Can you say something?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me and see my slides? Thumbs up? Yes. Okay. Great. Hi. Thanks for being here. This is really wonderful. I am going to pick it up and talk a little bit about how children build bilingual vocabularies. I am an assistant professor in speech and hearing science. I'm also a speech language pathologist. And I'm also a parent of 2 children in dual language immersion program in Seattle, a second grader in Japanese and a kindergartner in the Spanish program. So the central question that we are going to be thinking about is how children make meaningful connections between the languages they hear and their experiences of the world. To illustrate, we're going to simulate a language learning environment. So I want you to imagine you are a 4-year-old who is a speaker of English, and you're at the zoo, and you are now being exposed to Japanese as a second language. Let's see if this video works.
黒いかな。子供は背中をかいている。今度は尻尾をいじっている。猿が毛づくろいしているよ。すごくかわいい。猿の毛づくろいを見て。すごくふわふわしている。猿が毛づくろいをしているよ。
Okay, so for those of you who speak Japanese, this probably wasn't too challenging, but for those of us who are still learning, this simulates some of the challenges that young children who are acquiring a second language or a new language may face, because the world goes on quickly, moving along, and the speech stream also comes in very rapidly. There's no clear indication of what the words and how they're linked to the experience the child is having. Mr. Quine here, we're going to have a little philosophy, but he called this challenge that language learners face indeterminacy of reference. And this means that there's no clear mapping between the words and the world. In fact, the possibilities seem nearly endless. And for a bilingual learner, of course, or a multilingual child, there are often multiple mappings between words and objects, actions, and concepts, or maybe not even a direct translation. So we do know that kids, of course, are paying attention to the input. This is exactly what Naja has been sharing. They're listening to the properties of the speech. They're tuning in to the native properties of their language or languages, and they're pulling out those meaningful chunks or words, and they're linking those with the ideas in their world. And we do know that children's vocabularies early on are linked very closely with their experiences in each of their languages. And what this often leads to is a pattern of just what we call distributed vocabulary knowledge. So what this might look like, for example, is if we take a look at the productive vocabulary of a monolingual English learning child, you'll see the age here on the bottom of the graph. You'll notice that Their productive vocabularies may increase from around 200 words, close to age 2, all the way up to, on average, 600 productive words by age 2.5. And when we plot against the vocabulary, English vocabulary knowledge of a bilingual child, in this case, this represents children who are acquiring both English and Spanish. When we look at this bilingual child's monolingual or English vocabulary knowledge, we see that it appears to be approximately half of the content of our English learner. But we all know that this is only half of the information, right? When we also look at the child's Spanish knowledge, we see a consistent increase in a typically developing child as well. And only when we combine these two, the English and Spanish vocab, do we see in green here that the trajectory is nearly identical. And actually, by school age, we expect may exceed the vocabulary knowledge of a monolingual child. So given sort of this background of knowledge, my collaborators and I were interested in whether other linguistic domains beyond vocabulary were also distributed for bilingual learners. And to measure this, we developed a computerized touchscreen tool. It's for preschool children. The version we have is only in Spanish and English currently. It's kind of rapidly administered and automatically scored. And what we wanted to do, we tested about 300 bilingual Spanish-English preschoolers across a number of equivalent skills in different linguistic domains in English and Spanish. So for example, we looked at prepositional phrases, we looked at past tense, we looked at embedded clauses. And what we found here, this is just a depiction of a single child and their English knowledge. And you don't need to know what the subtests stand for, but on the bottom there you see the different domains that we evaluated. And this is the child's distribution, their performance on the English version of this tool. What you see here in pink is the child's performance on the Spanish subtests that matched the English version. And what you see here is the combination of this distributed bilingual linguistic system. Of course, the skills in each of their languages are heavily dependent on the input, the quality and the quantity of input they received. But beyond that, we found that even when we accounted for their language input and other factors, including the home language environment, the number of native speakers where they heard language from, we saw that there were similarities across domains in some areas, but less likely to be an association or a relation between other areas. And this connects with some of the ideas that Shuhan shared with us, considering the cross-linguistic transfer. And when Shuhan shared with us some of the areas that are related or influenced, she shared a little bit of the external, kind of extra-linguistic elements like attention, motivation, study skills, for example. What this really gets at is a question of what are those internal, intralinguistic areas that children are able to pay attention to and use as they're acquiring information and development in their other language. So my little illustration of cross-linguistic transfer here, we do have some evidence that children are paying attention to these building blocks of language. So as Naja shared, they're listening to the native sounds, they're paying attention to structures and to words that are sounding similar. They can pull out patterns and specific units, and they can recognize very early on whether these structures exist in their other language or whether they don't. And if they do, are they similar? So they really are showing evidence that they're attending to these unique properties and then comparing them kind of both implicitly and actively, explicitly. And so what we are trying to figure out with some of this research is what, if anything, transfers across languages. When are children able to use this information that transfers? And how can it either help or sometimes impede with learning a new skill or a new word or a new grammatical structure in their other language? And this is really important, I think, because when children are aware of these patterns in one language or the other, it really rises to this metacognitive level of thinking about acquisition processes actively. So one of the things that we measured in this computerized assessment was whether children were able to use similar strategies to learn new words in both of their languages. And when we break down this word learning process to its very basic level, for our early kiddos, we're thinking, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds here. First, they're doing this process, what we call mapping the word, the sound form, to the object, for example, an apple. And then the next step is to extend that new label, apple, for example, to all the other different forms that this apple can take in their world. In research, we often use what's called a nonsense word or a pseudo word to test this word learning process, because if we relied on only real word knowledge, it would not be a level playing field. We wouldn't know if some children had more experience or exposure to a certain concept or vocabulary word than other children. So we often make up words that are probable in the language, but are not meaningful. They're nonsense words. So what this looked like on our tool, this is an example of our English word learning task. And this is the first step. This is our mapping trial. The children saw these 4 images on a screen, and they heard somebody say, "The FEP is blue. Show me the blue FEP." So here's the example of the audio. Show me the blue FEP. And whoops. And do we have people who have already found the blue FEP? So what are the strategies you're using to figure this out? You're eliminating A because it doesn't meet the criteria of something blue. You hopefully have eliminated B and C because you already have a label for those. So you're doing this mutually exclusive process of saying it can't be B or C because I know those labels already. And hopefully you've identified D as our unfamiliar word and unfamiliar object. For the next step, we asked children, so children use the touch screen to select their response on this. And then we give them an extension trial where they have to demonstrate that they've understood that this noun label, this object label, can be extended to other FEPs. And for our correct answer here, they get to select from distractors where there's something completely different. That's our D, our red robot, where they find 2 familiar objects, one that fits that former property of something blue, or a light bulb, or the correct answer, the target, which is our C, our green FEP in this case. And what we found was that on these, not only on the noun learning trials, but we also tested how children learn new verbs and adjectives. And these were the subtests that were more closely linked across languages, suggesting that kids were actually picking up on similar strategies or using sort of shared common properties of word learning across both of their languages. And how we interpreted this is that when they're learning new words, they are tuning in to kind of cohesive knowledge based on a rule or a skill, and they're able to recognize similarities when they're acquiring new labels in their other language. And this contrasted with some of the performance on subtests that measured more language specific knowledge, which of course is absolutely wonderful to have and important for language knowledge in both of or all of the child's languages as well. So I know this sounds kind of a little bit removed from the real world. I think we need probably 2 more days to talk about how it relates. But what the point is, I think that we want to be able to focus not only on the content we're providing, but also on how children are learning this information, and supporting educators, parents, and the children themselves to really bring that awareness to the next level of how they're approaching language acquisition. As a clinician, I'm always thinking about how this relates to the clinical world. And I think that understanding challenges with language acquisition can be a sign of language impairments. And of course, it has to be similar across languages. We can't identify a language impairment in only one of a child's languages. And really drawing attention to the fact that we should be tuning into the individual differences in learning rather than taking a one-size-fits-all approach to language acquisition. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop your sharing and I will share. Okay, can you all see my slides? And can you all hear me? Did people say on the chat? Can you text? Yes? Okay, good. Hi, everybody. My name is Chan Lu. For those who don't know me, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Asian Languages and Literature at the University of Washington. And my research area is really in biliteracy learning for school children, school-age children. So this connects really nicely with my colleagues Amy and Naja here, because what you just heard moved from infants to perhaps up to preschool age. I don't have fancy videos or pictures to show you today, but I have some examples for you toward the middle of my talk. So moving to school, the task, it becomes, you know, increasingly, and it's intrinsically complex. Yes? I'm sorry, what? Oh, okay. Oh, let me try again.
Oh, it was presenter view.
Oh, I see. I don't know. Let me start one more time. So this is my slide. Oh, I will exit.
Is it within PowerPoint? You do not use presenter mode.
Okay, I'm going to not use presenter mode. This is not using it. So play from start.
Does it say presenter view? No, you're not on.
I'm not.
Oh, okay,
I'm not. Okay, I'll try again.
Oops, that's presenter mode.
That's presenter mode?
Yeah, that's
okay.
presenter mode. So don't click on that.
Okay.
Yeah, so it looks like.
Yeah, just a minute. So how do I not do presenter mode? Slideshow, play from start. This is presenter mode. This is
what was your PowerPoint setting on?
You know what? It's because
I am doing both.
You're recording. Yeah. It's because you're projecting here. And it's putting, it's doing presenter mode on one screen. And
yeah. I see. Maybe Amy, do you have my slides, and then you can share from yours, and I will just talk from here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, right.
That's true.
Right.
We can see.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Just bear with me, and I will try this one more time. Hold on. Because my computer is really doing multiple tasks here. My PowerPoint is not starting for some reason. Yeah. Maybe try on yours. Yeah. I know, I did.
You quit
Yeah,
and restarted.
it's
Can you force quit from there?
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Force quit.
Yeah.
From the Apple menu.
Oh,
Oh no, it quit now. Okay.
Yeah.
Did it work?
yeah, can you share? Yeah, and then, good. Mhm. Oh, yeah, I can see it from my, from this one.
Yeah, but then you have to click.
Oh, okay.
Here.
Oh.
All right, it's on mute.
Yeah, not that one. All right, sorry about the glitch.
Glitch.
So the task when we transition from school is intrinsically complex because our student body is diverse. Our families are very different. And also, like Amy said, the one size fits all model is impossible. So, however, regardless of what types of programs we work in, our goals are similar, which is to promote and to help our students to become bilingual and biliterate, right? Whether they are sequentially or simultaneously trying to achieve this goal. So we are also, acting both as classroom teachers and parents. We're working on this goal together. So from early years in elementary school, I would like to emphasize that oral language development is critical. And because, the science of language language development, bilingual or biliteracy development have repeatedly emphasized that oral language comprehension is critical because it sets the ceiling on reading comprehension. However, children differ markedly in their first language and especially in vocabulary upon entering kindergarten. And data shows that advanced children who are at or above the 75th percentile are about a year ahead of those who are average. And those who are delayed are about a year behind those who are average, okay? And the gap continues to expand as children move forward with their school career. So current school practices, especially in English-only schools, focus very little on oral practice in their primary school years. The level of language used in our English-only classrooms is often limited to what children can read and write. We're not engaging them in deeper and more meaningful discussions about the materials. And in dual language schools, especially in the partner language classrooms, by this I mean the non-English language, it's especially more limited. It's restricted by what students can understand. And teachers are working hard to provide a comprehensible classroom. By that, I mean teachers are perhaps afraid that, what I'm saying, is not going to be understood by the student, right? And research in French immersion has consistently shown that the French classrooms are acquisition-rich input, are providing students with acquisition-rich input. But what's missing here is actually the students' target language use, the output. So my colleagues earlier emphasized the importance of the quantity and quality of language input. So I'm going to switch gear to emphasizing output, okay? And we know that receptive vocabulary knowledge is very important in our oral language development. And this has been repeatedly shown in research. However, more and more so, expressive vocabulary knowledge, which means the words that you can produce rather than the word that you can passively comprehend are actually very good predictors of your reading comprehension. And this is true in your first language and also in your second language. And studies, including my own, have shown that children's expressive vocabulary knowledge is the best predictor of their reading comprehension in the second language they're learning. Then the question is, what should we do as classroom teachers and as parents to help our students become, foster their expressive vocabulary knowledge, right? So the rest of my talk focuses on, first of all, message for parents, message for teachers, and then message for parents. So for teachers, I would like to show you some examples. I think that would be the most straightforward for our participants. I will focus on 3 strategies that you could use in your classrooms, and I'll emphasize the latter 2. So the word association is one of the very frequently used, I think, classroom teaching strategy in our classrooms, whether it's in first language or in second language. However, I would like to encourage you to think about this. The kind of association that your students produce actually is a very good indicator of their language proficiency. My own research shows that elementary level learners tend to give teachers the kind, or in a research setting, the kind of syntactic-matic association, which means if you give them a noun, for example, coffee, and they tend to give you the association, oh, drink coffee. However, as students move on, as their proficiency becomes higher, they can give you associations that are called paradigmatic, which means I give you coffee, you can give me other nouns in the same category, such as milk, such as water, such as liquor, or something like that, okay? And this is a good indicator of their proficiency. But today I'm going to give you concrete examples of semantic mapping and graphic organizer and see how we can use that in our classroom to foster this kind of expressive vocabulary use. This is an example of semantic mapping when you are teaching general vocabulary. In the middle, in the blue circle, it says, a good friend should be. This is maybe a very common topic that elementary teachers could encounter. And then in the red and green and yellow and orange bubble are the words that we ask our students to provide. However, I would encourage that teachers would assign students into small groups and they can come up with their own words to fill the bubbles after discussion, rather than teacher fill it by herself or himself and then present it to the students. In this process, there is negotiation of meaning among the students. There is productive language use, and research shows that this kind of discussion among students actually fosters vocabulary acquisition. But the task doesn't stop there. So after students fill in the bubbles after their discussion, you could invite different groups of students to come up and present and share their ideas. Again, this reinforces their language use. One more time. This can be used to introduce general vocabulary and actually more easily to talk about academic vocabulary, okay? When you talk about different species or different kinds of fish or different kinds of mammals, you could easily have students map out the relationship between the big words they're learning, okay? And next, this is another example. This actually is a little bit more complicated because the target word here in the middle is yogurt. And for yogurt, okay, first of all, you learn what category it is. This is a kind of food. And then you could ask students to discuss, what is yogurt like? Is it cold, is it soft, or is it sweet? Okay, students may have different ideas about the kind of yogurt that they are used to. And in the end, in the blue bubbles here, you can ask students to contribute the kind of yogurt that they like, what they see in the market, or the kind of things that they eat most often, okay? Use this kind of chart to foster student discussion and also ask them to string together the discrete word into connected speech rather than just filling the bubbles, because that's not our goal here. Our goal is connected speech and productive use, okay? And moving on to graphic organizers, I would like to give you an example that I used in my class last week. Graphic organizers are most often used in the field to teach comprehension. However, it can be easily used to guide classroom-based oral presentation and also give a student as a guide for their rewriting tasks. And so this completes this kind of a text to speech and then text circle. So here is an example of graphic organizer I used in my class last week. The content is on social mobility. We discussed people in different countries, how their perception of social mobility differ from each other, and also how they deviate from the actual facts. And we discussed the differences between Americans and Europeans, and different differences between Americans of different political inclinations. And the text we used is a text called, this in Chinese, but it's based on an article published in American Economic Review on intergenerational mobility and preference for wealth redistribution, okay? And it's used in my 4th year classroom at the University of Washington. So first, I give students this kind of paragraph by paragraph task. Breakdown. For each paragraph, when we're reading it, I presented students this graphic organizer first, trying to help them basically dissect what each sentence is about and how they are actually contributing to the main theme of the particular paragraph. I think this goes back to what Shuhan said earlier about playing piano. You see how all the skills acquisition are the same. Breaking different phrases in a big piece of piano you're trying to play into smaller chunks is kind of parallel to breaking into smaller paragraphs, smaller sentences in a big text that you are trying to comprehend. So in this chart, what we're talking about is about government intervention, which is on top here. And I asked students to identify Americans' attitude versus Europeans' attitude. And then within the American, there are, broadly speaking, liberals and conservatists. And then what do the conservatives support? And what do the liberals support? This is what students are going to identify in their text, in the text. Next, I ask each student to work with, I ask the student to work with each other to identify the text from the message from the text that they are presented with. So here you can see, I will not go into details. Here you can see Europeans actually relatively favor government intervention, whereas Americans relatively not favor, okay? And then based on your political inclination, your opinions differ. And here is the conservatives' solution to this wealth redistribution. So moving to the next, I think in the interest of time, I should wrap up. I think the idea is really based on the ACTFL model of starting from the interpretive mode to presentational mode and to interpersonal mode, right? After after breaking down the chunks of the text, students actually come up to the front and actually retell the message here to the class to show us that they comprehend it. But in this case, the students are also using the kind of expressions and phrases they have acquired from the text. But next, we didn't stop just here, okay? On Wednesday, we finished talking about this in class, but I gave them a small assignment, which is, how about you rewrite the message just based on the graph that we used in class, okay? And then the next day, students come back to the classroom and shared their writing based on this graph. So this goes back to the interpersonal, and then it circles back again. But in the middle here is content. So we need some content to talk about. We need some content to train our skills rather than train the skills in a vacuum. So In the next few minutes, I have some quick messages for parents. I know many of our teachers are parents too, and we may have some parents in the audience too. So actually, we are all engaged in some very important task here, which is called family language planning. We may or may not realize that we're doing it. And family language planning can be as small as what languages do we want to plan to use at home, by whom, and how. But next is, what kind of schools do we send our children to, whether it's to, you know, a dual language immersion school or to an English only school, right? But our language choice actually has a very big impact on not only the individual family members, because it will affect the trajectory of the family members and what kind of language speaker that they will become when they reach adulthood, okay? It also affects the ideologies in our surrounding communities and our society at large. So what we're doing at home as parents are not just affecting our children, but collectively our society as a whole. And more importantly, for the non-majority language or for the non-English language in the context of America, is that we're actually affecting the linguistic fate of that minority language. So we, you and I, all together are actually doing some very important task here. I think the often mentioned policy practice at home is the so-called one parent, one language policy. And many of you might be practicing that at home. However, it works well if two languages are both elite languages, okay? And if one language is a minority, non-elite language, it actually, the results vary depending on many factors, including whether you're a consistent use at home and whether you have access to the resources for that minority language. So for parents, you know, who are speakers of the minority language, what should we do? Other than practice this one parent, one language policy, a practice that, you know, may produce various results, I would advocate for the following. One is us as parents should serve as role models. I think Shuhan or one of you mentioned this message earlier. And we need to be consistent and be aware of our own language use, because what we are saying, what we're doing to our children actually are being consumed by them very precisely, okay? And second, I believe Shuhan mentioned this too, is that we need to refrain from the deficit framework, okay? Oh, your grammar is bad. Oh, you don't know that word or this word. But actually, we are constantly giving children this idea that, okay, I'm a bad speaker of that particular language. And do you think if they get that message all the time, they will still be wanting to use that language? I doubt it, okay? So there is also a numerous research reports on this topic. Instead, we should, you know, be more positive about the task we're trying to do. And we need to understand children's choices and the pressure that they're facing, because learning languages, especially learning different languages of different typology, of different writing systems, are extremely hard. And children, especially when they reach school, they have their own choices when to use a particular language and when not to. I think they have their innate rationale for doing that. And we need to understand that instead of imposing our own policy on them. But the thing is, I'm not saying we should just go with the flow, let the children dictate. What my message here is that we can talk, we can discuss, and we can negotiate. But once we negotiated, we need to be consistent. And in the end, we need to respect children's language immaturity, their mixing and their swings. And understand that children who grow up in bilingual families, they are not two monolinguals in one. They are actually, their first language is bilingualism. Okay, so if we understand that, we know that bilinguals, as if you are a native bilingual person, you naturally mix the languages, okay? This is something that monolinguals perhaps do not understand from the beginning, okay? So in the end, my messages are that family language value and belief and use can and should be negotiated and discussed. it's very important to get support from your spouse, and also your extended family members, okay? So that they don't derail you one way or another. We're in this battle together. And when children reach school, I think this is the one last important message, like Amy said, you know, is that we need to communicate with teachers and other parents in that language at school, especially when your child attends a English-only school. You need to let the teacher know of your family choice. We are a, say, Spanish and English household, or we are a Mandarin English household, and this is what we do, and communicate that idea with your teachers. And teachers in English-only schools, their ideas and their perspectives about bilingualism can vary from enthusiasm to complete ignorance. So they may or may not be on the same page with you at the beginning. So it is our job to actually communicate with them and be your own advocate. And also, I think we need to be aware of the kind of the potential speech or the hearing, the kind of issue that our children may display at the beginning, but don't jump to judgment at first. Oh, my child is deficit in this area. Some of the problems might go away with maturity, but some of them might be problematic. At this point, then consult with a speech pathologist, such as people like Amy, and then we can work it out. So in the end, I want to leave you with some good resources that I personally like very much. The first book is called Language Strategies for Bilingual Families. It particularly examined the one parent, one language approach. It's very affordable, $15, I believe. And also the second book is called A Parent's and Teacher's Guide to Bilingualism, written by Colin Baker, one of the best respected author and researcher in the field of bilingualism. It answers many of our questions. And the next one is a more academic book called Success in Family Language Policy, okay? So I leave, because of time, I will end my presentation for now. And if you have questions, you can either raise your hand or send them in the chat box. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So Amy, you can unmute yourself there, and you can take the question.
Okay. It looks like, oh yeah, we do have a couple. This, of course, as I mentioned, needs, and maybe we'll just do a quick couple minutes for questions and then a break and move to our panel. But of course, as I mentioned, differentiating language differences from disorders requires another 2-day lecture series, but I'm happy to talk about that a little bit. When we do evaluate a multilingual and bilingual learner for a language impairment, ideally we are always considering home language environment and assessing the child in both their home language and English. The tools, as I'm sure you are all aware, are limited for many languages. Spanish has the most evidence-based assessment tools for both for bilingual approaches. But what we know from research is that if a child demonstrates delays in acquiring one language, we cannot automatically consider that to be a language impairment, because that could be based on the input. So we're always evaluating both. And yeah, that's my short answer.
Yeah. So I see a very interesting question here from Jenny. As a bilingual heritage bilingual parent, does it help or hurt to code switch at home? Have wanted to do one parent, one language, but my version would be dependent on my limited vocabulary set. I think this is a very important question here. So I will start as a native parent, native Chinese speaking parent at home, and then others can chime in. But I think we could also leave this to our next panel. My version is that, think about it this way. Oh, earlier someone asked what's an elite language and what's a non-elite language, right? So think about the United States as an example. English is the dominant language, and it is the language of schooling, so it's considered an elite language. Whereas, for example, Spanish or Chinese, they're not society-wide languages. They're not considered elite languages in this context, okay? So let's say my children at home, they only hear Chinese in the home. So what I do as a parent, I stick to the one parent, one language policy, but I do code switch not that often because I want them to have maximum exposure to me. But in this case, I'm very careful about what I do because oftentimes, as Chinese parents all know, your children reach college, they are very comfortable in the so-called kitchen language. They know everything about food, they know everything related to mundane tasks, but they lack vocabulary in school subjects. They don't know how to say calculation or plus minus or something in Chinese. So I am very aware of that. So I try to talk to my children about school subjects also in Chinese. But of course, as a heritage language speaker, you yourself may not have exposed to that or may not have the repertoire for that, right? So in that case, what do you do? I think out of what I can recommend at this point is that learn with your children, because as parents, if we don't learn, our children won't learn. That's my short answer here. But Amy and Naja can perhaps chime in if you have other better solutions.
I think one other thing that we emphasize quite a bit is we want families to feel comfortable speaking their language that they feel most comfortable speaking in, right? So we would never, as speech language pathologists, suggest that families stick to English, for example, if they have a home language or a different native language. We absolutely support heritage language speaking in the home. We understand that a big concern of many families is what the child's English proficiency would be when reaching school age. But that's something that we always work with families very closely on and emphasize. If you feel comfortable primarily speaking a language other than English at home, absolutely support that in every way with literacy as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think on this question, maybe Tina has a lot to say. So
yeah, and this is a good transition to sort of how families are doing this.
Right.
So I also, one thing for me too, as in my family, we actually have 3 languages. Like I said, we have Slovenian, which I'm pretty sure not many people in Seattle speak other than myself, not too many. And then we have Spanish and then English, of course. And the problem for us is that my husband and I, we have always spoken only English to each other. So what that means is that if we want to have a family conversation, that does happen in English many times. And I just wanted to say that I think that that's okay too. And that, when you are one-on-one with your child, you can still talk in your home language, interact in your home language. But of course, when other people are around, there are other factors that we're considering. And so your children will go back and forth a lot. And I think that that's perfectly fine. And we just support them in whatever language that they're speaking.
Yeah, so, and Michelle sends me a private message, but I think Michelle maybe means to send this to everybody, is that we need more heritage language program for adult heritage speakers to learn what they would have learned in K-12 education if they had a chance to be educated in their home language. And yes, I think I absolutely like this idea, and I actually have received messages from others about this as well. So because of time, let's switch to the parents panel, and if you have more questions for us, you could always email us. Okay, so let me move my computer.
Jen, can we take about a 5-minute break? Just because we're going a long time. Bathroom break.
Stretch. Michelle says a quick stretch. Yes, while we're moving around, please take a minute.
I think on 12:15.
Yeah. So plenty.
You can put up. Can you reach? Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hold it. Yes. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, well, it's pretty much zero.
How about just the three of you?
Oh, I see. There is no research on that. It would be very difficult to. Yeah, English and Spanish. It's just very.
Okay. Hi, Michelle, can you hear us? Oh, okay. Yeah. I can chat here.
Yes.
Yeah, we can switch.
Oh, great. Okay, I think Michelle is not back yet. So everybody can stand up and stretch a little bit. Okay, Michelle, you're back?
Just about. I was just
I
grabbing.
can't hear you. Can't hear.
We can't hear
sorry.
you.
Oh, can you hear me now? I was just grabbing a cup of tea, but that's okay.
You're muted, Michelle. You're muted.
I'm not
Do you
muted.
have to unmute her?
No, I don't. She can't unmute herself.
Oh, wait, try.
Okay, now.
Oh, did we have her muted?
I'm getting a lot of feedback, though.
Okay, go ahead. I
Okay.
turned this off. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Can you reach it? Yeah, turn the volume up. No?
Can you
Okay,
hear?
Okay, good. All right, great. Well,
No, this one.
We need the volume on here, but you have to mute it. We can have volume.
No, Amy, mute it.
we may have to go back and forth, I suppose.
Okay, we can begin now. Whoops.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. First of all, it's wonderful to see you all, and I'm here instead of Thad. Well, I'm here at home actually because I was taking the place of Thad, who has several sick kids at home, and his wife as well. And I was planning to be there with you, but I woke up with a couple sneezes and a little sore throat. I thought, I'm not going to even take a chance, and so I didn't head over there. I'm sorry to not be with you, although this has been working amazingly well, I have to say, and fantastic presentations by Shuhan and Naja and Amy and Chan as well. So the parent panel today is really about trying to take everything we've been thinking about and learning about so far and really applying it to people who are living this experience right now, because you have children who are in immersion or dual language immersion programs in our area. And some of you are both teachers or administrators or instructors of various sorts, as well as being parents. So then you're able to see it from both perspectives, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to just put out a question, and then we'll just kind of go round robin around at least the first one, which is the introduction, and then other topics. I think you'll all probably have something to say, but we can go back and forth a little bit. I believe our session is supposed to go till 12:15. I know we're starting a little late, but let's just see how it goes. We'll kind of get through most of the questions first, and then see what we can continue with if we want to complete it to the end. So again, thank you. So the first one is really, what are your family backgrounds? Just briefly explain, what your background is and what caused you to be interested in being involved with this type of education. You can briefly describe what kind of program and language and so on your child or children are in.
Okay. So hi everyone, my name is Zev. I'm a faculty member at the University of Washington. I teach Chinese linguistics, but my son is an 8-year-old in 2nd grade, and he's in a Spanish language dual immersion program. It has nothing to do with the family background of me or my wife. My wife is Korean American, and she knows some Korean as a heritage learner. It's not her best language. We're an English-speaking household. I know Chinese, that's the language I work with professionally, and neither of us knew really any Spanish before my son enrolled at John Stanford School. But he had an interest in Spanish that simply came from some exposure in preschool. The school was close to us. We value the idea of bilingual education and proficiency in another language. And so when he expressed interest, we tried to get him enrolled, and it was successful.
Wonderful.
Good morning, I'm Tina Bogucharova. I am Chinese. That's my heritage language. I speak and read and write fluently because I came when I was 11. My husband is Russian, so at home we have 2 children and we are a 3-language family, Russian, English, and Chinese. So my interest in this as a parent, of course, is to preserve, maintain their language because as many said, it's not about learning the language, but learning the culture and to think in the culture. And so that's what I try to emphasize at home as a parent. I'm also the principal of GMA Elementary School. So the biggest tug for me is to, the struggle is between the state legislature and standards, the practitioners' actual practice in the classroom, and the hopes and dreams of the parents. And there are sometimes synergy and sometimes conflicts. So I live in that Bermuda Triangle, and it's tough. Maybe I'll come out with questions later.
Good morning. My name is Flo Beaumont, and I have 2 children who are in the dual language immersion programs in the Seattle Public Schools. My oldest child is 17, and my younger one is 13. And how we came to this is a path that I could not have foreseen. My husband and I are both white, American-born. My mother and my father's parents were immigrants from Germany, so I heard German growing up. But even if I studied it on my own, because my parents were of the 60s and 70s ethic, which is you're in America, you're in English. So I didn't learn enough to be able to pass it on to my kids. My husband and I only speak enough to talk about things in front of our children that we don't want them to understand. So we have our first child by birth and our second child through adoption. And Denny was born in China. The process of adoption was very long. It was 4 years. And in that interval, we found, while we were waiting, we found a bilingual preschool that we sent our older child to. So he started when he was 3. And this is something that was literally completely foreign to my husband and me. And it took 4 years. So when Nat was 7, almost 7, he was 6 years old, we were able to adopt our son from China. And we went together to get Denny. And he was almost 3 at the time and had lived his life in an orphanage. But the staff didn't talk to the kids very much there. So he was speech delayed in his native language. But still, our older studied Chinese for a while already, was able to talk to Denny, and that just helped so much with the trauma that's natural to international adoption and the bonding for our family. So even before we were matched with Denny, my older son Nat was in the first class of the Chinese immersion program at Beacon Hill International School. And so both my kids have gone through Beacon Hill, both of them have gone through Mercer, and Nat's at Garfield High School now. Denny's still at Mercer.
Wonderful. Heidi?
Hi, my name is Heidi Reitzman. I'm a parent of a student in the Seattle Public Schools Dual Language Immersion Program, Japanese. He just graduated from John Stanford. He's now a 6th grader at Hamilton. He started learning from when he was a baby with my family. I'm half Japanese. My mom's from Japan. And I'm not fluent, but I was able to learn a little bit growing up. And so his exposure before school, before John Stanford, was limited. He went to a preschool where there was Japanese immersion, but he was happy to learn. And We just wanted to encourage his learning and his appreciation for global perspective and other cultures. And so we're thrilled that he's been able to be in the Japanese program, and look forward to having him continue through graduating from high school.
Wonderful. So many of you answered this first part of the next question. So if you did, you don't have to repeat, but then you can add on in this other second part of the question. Why did you enroll your children in a dual language immersion program? And can you share one of the ways you have felt most supported by your school and or teachers? So who would like to begin?
I can start this time.
Okay.
We were super lucky that Seattle Public Schools started the Mandarin immersion program the same year that my oldest son was ready for kindergarten. So we were on the adoption track. That's when we started there. It's been great to really have an opportunity for him to become almost fluent in a language that we could not have been able to teach him at home. And it's just a whole nother dimension for our younger son to continue his heritage language, to support him, and to put him in a place where he's in the majority in his school. So we were intentional about him being in a school that's majority Asian because he's a minority in his family. And there's another dimension to this because both Beacon Hill and Mercer are international schools. World languages are available to everybody. It's not just to the kids who are in the dual language classes. So my kids have also studied Spanish in school, and that's a fantastic opportunity for them to get a leg up on that school in middle school.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Zev.
I don't really have much to add as to why he's in the program, but in terms of support, I just wanted to say that so far his Spanish teachers have been fantastic. I mean, it's not just that he's in a dual language immersion program, but I feel like the quality of instruction has been excellent. And that's, you know, so if he was in a program that wasn't any good, it wouldn't feel as great to be in it as it does when it actually seems to have the support of dedicated teachers who are doing a good job.
You know, I think my husband and I are both bilingual, and it's almost like a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't you? You know, it still kind of confounds me, like when I hear parents have a choice but don't make the choice, and I just don't. It's okay. I don't want to be judgmental here, but I'm preaching to the choir. You all know the value of the second language. So if the opportunity presents and you get in by lottery, you know, we take it. But I do, and I am very appreciative of my school and that my teachers are dedicated to this profession. They do this not to teach. They do this because they understand they are bilingual speakers themselves. And I feel like when teachers teach with passion and dedication and not just teaching to get through the standards, it makes a difference, you know. I'm very proud of that. And as a parent, I'm very thankful for my teachers, and as an administrator, it's my job to keep inspiring them and to bring the passion of teaching to them every day so that the children can thrive.
Another benefit of the program to my family is that we're able to connect with families who we otherwise couldn't have, and this is the Chinese-speaking families, because of language and cultural barriers. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to socialize, and people would not naturally choose that path. But with our kids who are in school together and working on projects together, it's opened up connection for us.
Nice. How about Heidi?
Well, yeah, I agree with what's been said. I recognize right away that the opportunity to have my son go to John Stanford was not just because of language learning. I really was convinced and really hopeful that it would be a good academic experience in general, but also a way for him to discover cultures and the idea of what it means to be a global citizen. I was hoping for all of those things. I think a dual language immersion school is very intentional about cultivating with students. And I also agree about how it's not just about the student experience, My son goes into a dual language immersion school. Our family is in that community. We are all benefiting and participating and part of this entire experience together. And that's so exciting and wonderful.
You know, and actually, Heidi, the next question really relates to this, so I'll let you go a little further. It's like, what are the successes, surprises, or challenges along the journey? So it sounds like this is one of the surprise, that the whole family is actually in the program.
Yeah, well, you know, there's a lot of opportunities as a parent to get involved. And because I spoke a little bit, I was able to be in the class at kindergarten a little bit, but as they, you know, outpaced my learning level, you know, I was finding ways to get involved outside of the classroom. You evolve, you get creative. There's still a lot of wonderful opportunities to learn with your kid, and also to forge relationships with other people in the community that maybe you wouldn't been able to otherwise. For example, we have a Japanese culture festival every year at John Stanford. I was part of the committee. I was able to meet and talk with and be comfortable with a variety of different people, different language speaking abilities and cultural backgrounds that really was amazing. I don't think I would have had that experience otherwise.
Right. Zev, Tina, Flo, would you like to add on that? So things that were surprises, successes, or challenges along the journey?
I was surprised that my kids could learn to write in Chinese. You know, with having no support for that at home and just half their day learning this. And the teachers have also evolved their teaching methods through experience. So my older one, they were learning opinion, and by the time my younger one came along, no, straight to writing in characters. It's wonderful that we have this as a foundation for, you know, further study or just feeling facility in something that other people don't have such access to.
Yeah, the surprise for me is, it's the friendships I have formed with other families, you know, kind of like a support system, to be together in a house with like-minded individuals with similar core values is something that I just didn't really, I mean, I was like, I'm going to get the education and then think about myself. Along the way, it's tremendous growth for me as a parent, as a community member, you know, and so that's a pleasant. So I see the role of the schoolhouse transforming into, like, you know, it's for the people. I feel like it's really more for the parents too. You know, as an immersion parent, there's so much more. We have to learn everything together. I mean, that goes to the challenges too. Sometimes it's hard to support homework, right? And you know, you're doing double language and et cetera, et cetera. So without that support in each other and the families, to have a kind of like a, what's it called? Bouncing walls. I'm losing my word. Flip wall, no, bounce your thoughts of, what's that word? Okay.
Sounding board.
Sounding board. Bouncing.
Sounding board. Bouncing board, some kind of board.
So when we run into challenges at school, whether it's with school or district or state standards, you know, my go-to will be to the parent, like, hey, what do you think about that? Even though I'm the principal, but I want to hear what my parents think.
So for us, both a challenge and an opportunity is that we are not a Spanish-speaking household, and neither my wife nor I have had any formal instruction in Spanish. So we've been trying hard to learn. We've been doing it through Duolingo. We're very religious now about our Duolingo, and it's actually been great for us. We have experience learning languages. We know a lot about languages, so it doesn't seem too daunting to take up another language, especially one that's so important in the United States. So it's been great because putting our son into the program has given us an opportunity to learn a really valuable language. And of course, he's much better at it than us, which is also great because he can be better at something than his parents from a very young age, and that instills a lot of confidence in him. One of the challenges we faced in the Spanish program at John Stanford is there are far more second language learners of Spanish than native language learners of Spanish in the Spanish dual immersion community there. And so we have not had the same kind of experience of building a community of Spanish-speaking families, or of the children who are learning Spanish as a second language being in an immersive environment. It's more the teacher speaking and most of the children trying to speak Spanish, but there are not a lot of kids who are native Spanish speakers. It's a small percentage. And I don't know why the demographics worked out that way. I know the goal is to have more of a balance in the programs, but that's definitely been a challenge for us.
I might add that actually that is one of the big challenges, is that to have a balance, you have to have control of the assignment plan in order to ensure that the students that bring the language skills that you hope to attract can get in. And that has not been a choice that Seattle schools would make. When they made John Stanford and McDonald choice schools, option schools it's called in Seattle, they did allow for a 15% set aside. So there's guaranteed to be a few spots for kids outside that neighborhood or geo zone to get in. But, and now this year they've increased it to 20%, but we had recommended in 2016 that it be at least 30%. And so the reality is that if students who would most benefit, both because of their linguistic backgrounds, can't get in, it doesn't help them, and it certainly doesn't help the kids who are the second language learners either. So that's one of the challenges, I think, in general with our models and how they develop independently really in each district, because our districts are all very, very different in how they've approached it. But so with that in mind, what are some things that you wish you'd known before you started the program?
Yeah, I think when I started the program, my child was just born. So in thinking about that, I didn't realize how much work it would take from parents. And I'm a well-equipped parent, bilingual, bicultural, biliterate, and the principal of the school. Yet my biggest challenge is supporting learning at home. Like, this is a mystery to me today. Then I was reflecting on everything that was talked about this morning, from Shuhan to Temu just now. There's a lot of tug and pull between what researchers recommend, what practitioners are actually doing in the classroom, what parents actually face at school, because the child, 8 o'clock, the 8 a.m. child is different than the 6 p.m. child. We all know this? Yes? Okay. So it's really, so what I didn't know before entering school age is that there will be this tug and pull, and the interests differ. You know, our students' progress is measured in reading and writing, yet we know that speaking development is so crucial, yet our teachers, can't blame them, because you're teaching to the standards about reading and writing, very little time on oral language development. So, and then we know the 6 p.m. child, when they come home, and that's why I asked about the homework. They don't want to do the homework. And then yet you're like, well, your teacher gave this to you. Like, I need you to go. So all these things that I just didn't think I would personally have, I'm like, I'm capable, I'm going to be good. But yet it's a challenge every day, and I'm still trying to figure it out. So I actually wrote myself some notes here. As an administrator, I think it's not so much about training my teachers and my kids. I need to do a parent education seminar like monthly.
Well, kids are in elementary school, right?
Yeah.
Yes. By the time your kids get to high school, you're not going to understand their homework anyway. This is what every parent goes through. And, you know, maybe you hit it a little earlier if your kids are in elementary school in a language that you don't speak, but you're going there regardless.
Yeah.
Oh, no, totally.
Flo, do you have any things that you wish you'd known before Nat got into the program way back when?
No, I mean, it's just been such a great experience, and I think it's because my family was in the bow wave of the program that we were really involved, and so we've had great support from the beginning, and that's been very helpful along to have a community of parents and teachers who are so supportive of our kids.
Great. How about Heidi?
Well, I think I wish I'd known earlier how to support my kid at home in different ways that I wouldn't call homework. I'm trying not to use that word. We're trying to do in our family more of a lifestyle of just talking about culture and picking up language here and there, and you know, going for a walk and talking about different things in a different language, as I think Shuhan mentioned earlier, and you know, just being creative and approaching language learning in a less structured and maybe less traditional paper and pencil way. So I wish I thought about that more earlier and had guidance on that earlier, but I can see how later that's instilled a joy in my son for the language learning and cultural competency he's developed. It really is really great to think about it that way in hindsight. The Seattle Public School District this year, I think it's new, created something called Be a Super Reader. And I thought about that, I read it, and it was really great guidance on how to encourage literacy skills, but it's very English oriented. I would love to see a version of this in different, not translated in different languages, but to encourage learning and reading in other languages. Maybe, you know, there could be on the backside something for Japanese with book recommendations and so on. I would love to have had that.
That sounds really great. Zev, anything you want to add?
Yeah, so one thing I didn't know before, and that has not been a huge problem so far, but I am thinking it may become an issue, is what it would mean to have certain subject areas taught in the second language. So my son is learning science in Spanish, and there are situations that I can imagine or that have already happened where he might be ahead or behind in a particular subject area, and it's not clear if it's the language or the subject in which more attention is needed, or even if there's just some concerns, maybe unfounded, like, wouldn't he be learning this material better if it was in English? And do we need to worry about that for the subject area taught in Spanish?
Yeah. Good point.
Much guidance about those questions before we start.
Yeah, those are really good points. What would be a top priority for you going forward? Have 5 more minutes? Oh my God. Oh, time for questions, right?
We have one with Nicole in the audience, and I think it will be great to ask her to give some comment on this issue as well. Nicole.
Oh, sure. Yeah, do you want to pop in right now?
Yes, just ask. Yeah.
Who is it that are we asking Nicole? Oh, Nicole, yes. What would you like to ask, Nicole?
You mean the thing I wrote?
Yes.
Yeah. So I've mentioned this to Michelle for sure, and maybe Heidi before, but I think I'm Nicole. I'm at McDonald in the Japanese program, and I've been there like you, Flo, since the very beginning when we first opened. And I think that one of the things that I see is our building in our community is often dealing with a low-level hum of cultural conflict that if it's given the right attention can be like incredible learning opportunities for staff, for parents, for children. But I don't think that that's often taken advantage of. And so it can sort of create this tension that creates a workload that I don't know that everyone's always ready to even identify, let alone then grow from, if that makes sense.
Any thoughts on that, anybody?
So was that conflict between staff members?
Yeah, for instance, you'll have children in the classroom, like in the kindergarten classroom, and, let's say they're all being parented very differently, and it's just a little bit more exponential because of the cultural differences. It's not, and I'm not even sure the teacher is aware of all those differences, let alone the students also being aware of them, and then the parents being aware of them. And, I feel very fortunate because I've lived in many different scenarios and kind of have that perspective about things. And so sometimes what I see is what I think are teachers and parents thinking that there's, particularly they'll say a social emotional issue. And I don't think it's really a social emotional issue. I think it's actually a cultural issue, and you have young minds trying to navigate just many vectors of cultural interaction that I'm just not sure everyone's aware of or at play, or how to even bring attention to it so that it can be utilized for increased cultural fluency and respect.
I think teacher collaboration goes a long way towards addressing that. So my kids in elementary school, half the days in Chinese and half the days in English. And English and Chinese teachers, and I assume also with the Spanish teachers, worked really closely together. So they all knew the kids. They could bring their different perspectives to how the kid is behaving in each classroom and address that.
If I may make a suggestion, not really a suggestion, but what I saw in some schools is that they actually have sort of like get together similar to this and have parents and teachers, everybody sit down and talk about certain topics. For example, how do you do discipline, and what you think of bedtime issues or the reading, how do you do that at home or whatever it is, and people just kind of open up and talk about how they do it in different homes. And then that way you really get a sense of, oh, that's what the child is bringing to the school. And I think that's very nice. And what I have experienced is that, both teachers and parents are so appreciative of having these kind of opportunities to engage in the dialogue, particularly, like immigrant families and people coming from maybe lower socioeconomic or educational system, and they feel empowered sitting together with all those big shots, parents and school administrators and teachers, and talk about how they do it and how their child behave at home, that type of thing. So you might want to kind of specifically have some guiding questions, like what we're doing right now, specifically on how do you help them with the homework? How do you do the discipline? Or even how do you engage in dinner time? Because research has shown over and over again, dinner interaction is really key, in family bonding and language use. And so that kind of thing really is very helpful and fun. And people just feel like, oh, I know you now. And I don't feel like you are more kind of me and the other, or they and us, that type of thing. So just one experience to offer.
That's a good idea. There's really no reason we couldn't set something like that up. So among the parents, let's talk about how to facilitate that happening. So I've got a couple more questions. One has to do with enrolling in a dual language immersion program, but I think you guys have talked a lot about considerations going into that. And the last question is something that's also come up in the chat, which is really, when you think about your bilingual, multilingual students reaching high school, what opportunities in terms of courses, community activities, projects, etc., do you wish for your student to experience? If you have a middle or high schooler, what do they wish to experience if you know or they are here? And I think Flo is probably the one who's at the high school level. I feel like we've walked through that journey step by step really since Nat started in kindergarten. So tell us a little bit about both your expectations, your experience, what you would dream for, and so on, and then we'll hear from everybody else too.
Well, as you know, we don't have a viable high school pathway in Southeast yet, but we're working on that, and I hope we'll come together, not for this coming school year, for the one afterwards. And I think it becomes a challenge at high school because kids have their own ideas about what they want to keep pursuing, and you need enough numbers to make the program viable. So it's also good, though, that they've been trying to draw in more heritage speakers who didn't necessarily come through the immersion pathway. And that can really bolster class experience and, enough numbers to keep it going. It would be nice to have some sort of outside activities for the kids because, like people have said here, they learn academic subjects, but they don't learn how to ask somebody for directions and understand the answer. So for Chinese, that's a challenge in Seattle since there are not very many Mandarin speakers. The kids are not learning Japanese or Toishan at school. So you'd have to be very thoughtful about how to develop a good experience for them. It'd be great if there could be even just a couple of special activities during the year where they have an opportunity to use their language with native speakers in a context that is not school. Maybe we have to go all the way to Bellevue for that.
And can you say something about the middle school experience, though, because both of your kids, your son Nat was in the first class going through, obviously, and Denny's there now.
Yeah, so that's developed nicely, I think. It was one class period out of 6 in the beginning. So they were learning social studies and they were learning the regular Seattle Public Schools social studies material, but in the target language. And for Chinese, that's expanded for the 6th and 8th graders now for a second class on literacy, because that's what they weren't getting through immersion. That's been good. I think they need the extra time with the language, because once you get to middle school, you really so much caught up in the English world that it's easy for the immersion language to be kind of put to the side.
How about Heidi? Because you also have a child who's now in middle school and you've worked very hard on the high school pathway issue, especially for Japanese.
Right. Right. My dream is for the language immersion environment to continue to be rich and challenging and different. And I would love to support our teachers and our staff to develop and increase opportunities for a student to learn the language in other subjects. I know we got an OSPI grant to translate social studies material into the different languages for middle school, which is really exciting. And I also want to stress how important it is at the high school level. We just finished that battle for Japanese in the West. You know, we worked really hard with Michelle and others to make sure we had Japanese in high school when Lincoln opened in September. You know, so because we're at sort of the vanguard of these programs at the high school level, we're not only concerned with curriculum and the learning experience, but also the planning and the politics at the district level, making sure the programs can grow and become supported at those higher levels. That's my dream, is to have complete pathways and maybe more pathways for more language learning in the district.
Great. Tina, you're really involved with what's happening in Bellevue, so you can probably speak a lot more to kind of that topic of where Bellevue is heading with secondary level programs.
Yeah, our first cohort is entering 9th grade next year, and we just finished talking about what the high school pathway will be, and it's going to be heavily based on the Asian Society's global competency.
Oh, great.
Yeah, because there are standards published on Asian Society's page. So what we want to do in Bellevue is, and we've already started, in fact, I think my 3rd grade teacher, Sun Lao Shi, is on here right now. Like, we start in elementary school by introducing global competency, you know, but the language education is not there to fully go deep and read research articles. Like Sun Lao Shi's class, it was investigating like a water shortage problem because it related to science. What we want the kids to do is investigate the problem, recognize perspectives, communicate ideas, take action, be change agent, as Shuhan was saying. So in high school, what that pathway is, because when they get to high school in Bellevue, one course is dedicated to the Mandarin dual language. And that course is a literacy course, but it's not only just a literacy course. It's a literacy global competency course where they're gonna research real world problems, go through these 4 domains, come up with a solution, and actionize it, right? This is currently being developed, and Bellevue School District actually put competency as one of the 3, district-wide plans for all programs, because we recognize it. So this is very exciting. So I would hope that my daughter's in 3rd grade, so we still have time. And when she gets to middle high school, it better be developed nicely, right? So, but I'm happy to see Bellevue going this direction. I'm happy to see that Asian Society already paved the pathway for us, and I hope that we all take advantage of their resource and not reinvent the wheel. I mean, it literally is here. You can't not follow it. And there are published, like, by grade level, K1, 2, 3, like grade level standards published in like ICANN statement and educator statement of what global competency looks like per grade level. Like, it can't be more easier than that. Okay, I'm just.
Yeah, and of course our state has been involved in this work since it was initiated in 2010, and the World Affairs Council also has had grants in recent years to take that work out further. So absolutely would be wonderful to see that taking off in Bellevue. Shuhan, did you want to add something? Can you
Yes, I have to unmute myself. I just want to add to, what is being said, because this is so vitally important. And I just want to address one area where everybody's talking about hoping to increase more opportunities in the community or even in the school setting for language use, And some programs that I saw, it's really wonderful. What they do is that you identify some kind of curricular project, and then with a school in which, the target language is being used. And for example, there's a school in New York, and they connected with a school in Shanghai. And so it's a water project. So they are checking on water quality. And so students in New York, they go to the Hudson River and do the sample. And then Shanghai, they do the Huangpujiang, and then you come up with the criteria and template for what to look for and how to guide the project. So both teachers are able to engage students, but then students follow similar curricular inquiries, and then they compare, and then they have Skype at that time, but now, Zoom conference, and they can compare, and they also email each other for the data and presenting. So it really is wonderful, combining language, culture, global competency, as well as science, environment, whatnot, into the curriculum mix. And students really feel empowered because they are really using the language. And there's a little bit of a competition in which group can use the language better, and they are so motivated in doing that. And the project also extends to some other school. They have kids learn one song in Chinese and one song in English, and then the Chinese kids will sing in English, and Chinese kids will sing in English, and Chinese kids would, vice versa, and it really is powerful. And the songs could be popular songs, because one thing especially about Chinese classroom is that we are really presenting the dead culture, from tomb after tomb, from dynasty after dynasty, or something that's not relevant. But research have, student survey have shown over and over again is they want to know what teenagers are eating, are dressing, are, viewing and doing, and entertainment and so forth. So we really have to gear towards the what young kids like, and making sure that they make friends even virtually, because that again is also number one finding of one research finding way back by some universities among the 5 C's, and also all the goals of learning a language. What is the number one goal? And inevitably, number one is making friends with students of that culture.
Thank you, Shuhan. And actually, we're at 12:10, and I'm supposed to end the panel. I actually was hoping to end with Zev and maybe Chan talking about how you're going to prepare the universities for our students that are coming through these programs so that they really have opportunities when they get there. You don't have very much time to do that, but maybe at the next meeting. I also just put in the chat a link to wabewa.org. So if you're interested in starting a dual language immersion program, this is the conference to go to. They have amazing experts like Collier and Thomas coming and so on, plus all of the people from the state, from OSPI, where there's more grant funding that has come, and leadership from the state level to support these programs. So that would be the next event. That would be a great place to go. And I'll turn it back to Chan. Thank you all parents for being on this panel. My pleasure to join you here.
So thank you, Michelle, for moderating this panel, and thank you to the three of you. Wonderful. So I have a few messages to actually end our morning session. Number one is in reaction to Michelle's question, and we're talking about pathways here. Actually, I would like to invite you to all think about a K-16 pathway. rather than a K-12 pathway. Because that, I don't know if you remember when I was first interviewed at the University of Washington, in my talk, I said, you know, the student who will be reaching our college, you know, 5 years down the line, they are no longer going to be Chinese 101 learners. They will be Chinese 400 level learners wanting to learn something new. So are we as college professors ready for that? I think at this point, we are exploring our pathways, but we are aware of it, okay? But not everyone is aware of it, okay? So I think that's a big challenge for us too. But at least at the University of Washington, we're trying what we can to adapt to this new change. And secondly, I think I just want to summarize 2 points I take away for today. I think from Naja and Amy and my own research presentation, we can see that children from infancy on, they learn what we provide to them. Children, their ability to perceive phonemes in different languages drastically reduced because the language input in the environment reduced. And earlier, Flo mentioned that, oh, you are surprised that your children can actually learn to write Chinese characters, right? Just because our school systems in other non-dual language immersion schools did not provide them the opportunity to learn, does not mean they can't learn. So we as educators, I feel now we have, you know, the opportunity and the responsibility to make sure that we create that kind of opportunity for them at school, at home, and in the community. And my last message here is that I know all of us are concerned about the coronavirus, and we as, you know, educators, we're not in the forefront of fighting this virus, but we are actually fighting the virus of monolingualism in the United States, and we are trying to eradicate that. So we are doing what we can, okay? And thank you everyone. So the last message here is that for those of you who need clock hours, will receive an email from us about how we proceed, okay? So thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. And please stay tuned, and we will have another session to make up for our afternoon. And also, our communication channels are open. Please email us if you have questions, and reach out, okay? Thank you, and see you in the future. Bye.